can't make it, then you'll have a copy of the recording which you can send along. As I've said before, so good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Jonathan Castellino, and I'm the APAC Regional Sales Manager. I've been with the company for over 5 years now, and I work across key accounts for Avolution. Today I'll be taking us through the introduction slides, describing our company, our products and services. Peter Smith will be taking us through the functional walkthrough. He's the head of consulting for the region. Peter.
Yeah. Hi guys.
Okay.
Hello.
And sorry, and obviously Zach's joining us too. So without further ado, I'll make a start on the presentation. But if you have any questions as we're going through, please feel welcome to just stop us and let us know what your questions are.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll start off by explaining a little bit about us. So as a company, we've been around for 18 years now, and we have 7 offices globally, including Sydney, where we're speaking to you today, but we're also opening up operations in Singapore, so we'll be a little bit closer. We're a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant and the Forrester Wave, or the ranking bodies. AbACUS as a software company has reached over 100 different companies worldwide and over 3,000 companies. The great thing about AbACUS is it's a very flexible tool, and it supports over 100 different frameworks and notations out of the box. So we have clients across all of the major industries, and perhaps you'll recognize Airbus and Virgin Atlantic, but we also work across everywhere else. So we have had Coca-Cola as a client in the past, a lot of various banks across the world. So we're quite used to working with different companies and different requirements. And we have actually worked with Toyota in Australia in the past as well. So it's an area which experience within the transport and infrastructure space. We have a case study with ARUP, which is an engineering firm located in London. And as I said previously, we could send through a case study about what we were trying to do over there. But essentially what ARUP was trying to do was note down a single source of truth, or have all of their data in one system. So that was what ARUP was trying to achieve, and we're happy to send through a case study there. And as you can see, we have many companies within the space like Airbus and Virgin and others. So within the Forrester Wave, we are currently the #1 tool, and we're also the leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, so we've assumed the #1 position there. According to independent tool reviews, we've achieved a #1 ranking with Silcom, Pragmatic, and then the most important thing for us is what our customers or what our clients think of us. And so you'll be able to see there's a thing called the Gartner Peer Insights, and you can see what real-world IT professionals in the top right there's a thing. And so you can go to these reviews and you can see what real architects have said about Avolution, not just the company. The real-world architects have ranked us a 4.7 out of 5 stars. And the quality of our service is paramount or very important to us. You see with deployments that 71% of clients derive value from AbACUS within 3 months, and 90% got value out of the tool in less than 6 months. Out of user satisfaction, you can see that AbACUS and Avolution was ranked #1 versus the major competitors. And we try and really spend a lot of time and focus on making sure that IT professionals are happy with us. Now, Gartner also has other rankings where they go through the usability of the tool. And so they'll go through things such as our ability to model, present in various different frameworks, and that it's easy to use, as well as our ability to change the meta model. So you'll see that I think it's in this column here, and our competitors are on the right. But you can see in the major areas that we've done a good job there. So on AbACUS. So with AbACUS, we follow an iterative response. We try and understand your problems or try and understand your issues, try and analyze, and then communicate those issues onto people within your organization or your business. With AbACUS, we try and make the tool easy to use, so it's easy to import data from various different formats, such as Excel, Visio diagrams, SharePoint, and other places. As I mentioned before, there's over 100 different frameworks. It's very easy to get lots of them. Now, within the tool, there is inbuilt features such as cost analysis, risk analysis, reliability of servers, and other metrics which you can look at. I'll allow Peter, Peter will go through some of these metrics later today, but the idea is that you would want to map whatever's in the current state and evolve and create various different future states and do what's called what-if analysis, or what if change something, what will be the impact on costs and other areas. So we'll move on to the next point here, which is easy to communicate, enrich diagram, create custom dashboards for the various stakeholders in your organization, and create reports for people in various roles in your organization as well. So again, these are areas which Peter can go through once I pass over to him. As I mentioned before, AbACUS supports over 100 different frameworks and notations out of the box. And one thing which would be great for us to understand later in the presentation today is whether your team has expertise with TOGAF, Archimate, BPMN, or other standards and notations. Depending on the expertise in the team, it's easy for us to cater for them. So
can I ask?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So I can see that you are also support the APQC, American Process American Process Standards.
Yes.
So what type of? I think the APQC is not just a framework, like many process examples or process standard framework. So what type of data or what type of framework you're supporting the APQC?
I can answer that, John. So with some of the word framework is probably taken quite broadly here. So some frameworks like TOGAF is an actual TOGAF and TF and DAF are actually frameworks that guide you through the actual creation and evolution of your architectures. Some of the other things that are called loosely called frameworks like APQC are useful, but they provide more of a taxonomy of different types of components. So the main thing that you would use APQC for generally is the taxonomy of the different types of processes that you would have within an organization. Now, this is quite valuable for a lot of organizations because they don't quite really understand exactly what they do, and it gives them a starting point to actually then start to map applications to a standardized sort of process framework so that they can start to look at duplications of applications and to see how the applications are actually supporting the business. So the framework in that that extent, and even some of the notations is quite broad. So some are just taxonomies, some are fully frameworks, some are fairly light on, but I'll show you some of the lists that we have, but we can support a range of different things.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much. So we are very interested in the TOGAF framework to establish the EA architecture itself. And
Yes.
the APQC, we refer to the business architecture, like a business capability or process itself. So we refer to the APQC. So that I have a question like that. So thank you very much.
Right. Okay. Yes. So normally what we do is that we can actually combine frameworks together so that we can bring in, and I'll show you one of the frameworks that we do use, which is the Avolution framework, which is based on TOGAF. But it allows you to bring in extra areas that are not that well supported by TOGAF or Archimate, for example. We'll have a look at that later on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, pretty. Yeah.
Okay. So, John, you ready to go? I'm getting lots of noise on the line at this end.
Yeah, I've just stopped sharing. Did you hear what I said just before?
No, I heard a lot of noise.
So that's okay. So we'll move over to the demonstration now. Thanks for the questions. And if you have any questions as we go through, feel welcome to ask. So Peter, it's over to you.
All right. Okay. So what I'll do is just share my desktop at the moment. So one thing that I will show you is a little bit about the tool. So with the AbACUS tool, there are the two main components of the tool. There is the AbACUS Studio, which we have down the bottom here on this diagram, which I hope you can see. And the Studio, okay, the Studio is where the architecture work is done. So that's where the architects spend their time sort of setting up the model of the organization, so linking components together and doing the analysis of the architectures, but also starting to create some of the diagrams, catalogs, matrices for the that will be used elsewhere. Now, with the other parts of the tool, we have the collaboration server. So the collaboration server allows multiple users to access a particular model. So with the tool, because everything is connected together and it's in a graph database, you can't lock the whole table just because you want to go in and make some changes to applications, because applications are attached to processes and also attached to technology, which might be being used by other areas. So what the collaboration server does uses the version control to allow you to check out a copy of the architecture so you can make changes to it, and it will commit the changes back into the central repository. And in doing that, it will look for any particular conflicts with other users, so that if someone, if you checked out and deleted an application and someone else at the same time actually renamed an application, then when you committed it back, it would recognize that there is a conflict that two people were working on the same component, and will put up some measures as to and recommendations as to what should be done with that. So what that does is it allows teams of architects, and some of our customers have quite a lot of architects working on the one model, but it allows them to do everything that they need to do without having to lock the whole model because they want to do things. Now, the other thing that we have at this level is we have data integrations, which John has mentioned. So AbACUS is designed to be quite an open system. So we have an open API, so RESTful API, for example, so that we can, or you can write an APIs to read AbACUS, but also to update AbACUS. And with that, we have some integrations already available for the things like ServiceNow and SharePoint, but also we support data coming in from Excel and XML and lots of other formats. So what we try to do with the tool is that we try to allow the system to be integrated with your environment, so that if you have CMDBs or data in other areas, that you're not spending your days doing data entry within AbACUS. We want to automate this as much as possible so that the architects are spending their time doing the analysis and doing their architecture work, not trying to tidy things up. The other thing too is automating that. It makes it easier to maintain the data, so that with some tools, it's, you know, the problem is that the data gets out of date, and then people stop relying on that data because they can't make decisions on it because you know, the information in there is getting a bit old. The other thing that we have is the analytics, which we'll talk about later on, which allows you to run sort of algorithms against the model to actually get some measurements out of the architectures. And AbACUS is very much based on using analytics to you know, to analyze what we're doing so that we're making smarter decisions and we're understanding the need for change and how we're going to make the change and what the impacts of change will be. So in the top area here, we have this AbACUS Enterprise. So AbACUS Enterprise is where we collaborate and where we present the information to our stakeholders. So in this level, we create rich visualizations for our stakeholders so that they can consume the information and we get the messages across that they need. So in some cases, I'll show you some of these in a minute. You have different types of users. So you might have application owners, or you might have the senior executive who are interested in certain parts and have certain concerns. So we create dashboards so that they can quickly consume the information that they need and get answers to the questions that they need. And this is all done in rich visualizations so that they can, so it's presented in a manner that they can consume it quite easily. So with the studio, so the studio is, as I mentioned, is where the architects do their work. So this is where you need people that have the licenses for the studio. But at the enterprise level, for general users, they just go, they don't need any special licensing for that. So anybody who has access to the URL can access that information. But in addition to that, for some sets of users, they can actually update information in the enterprise, which will actually go back and update the studio. So for example, if an owner of a application sees on their dashboard some information which is not quite correct, they have the ability to actually correct that or add new components up in the enterprise, and that way they don't need to know anything about the AbACUS studio. So we make it easy for people to maintain the data, and we make it easier for them to consume the data and also to collaborate the information. So we're actually increasing, I think in the next release as well, which is due imminently, the ability to actually link into things like SharePoint and that to send messages based on the artifacts that have been created in the cloud. So I'll show you the first thing, which would be the AbACUS Enterprise. So as architects, we're doing two things. We're trying to model our organization, and we're trying to understand, identify a need for change, and trying to identify how we might implement change. But we're also trying to communicate with our stakeholders things that they need to know. So what we have is this enterprise tool where we provide a dashboard for stakeholders, and when the user logs on, so this is normally part of the single sign-on, they would come in and they would be associated with a particular dashboard. So with this, at the moment, I've got access to all of the dashboards, but we could come in at the high level and we might see a strategy dashboard. And this is showing where this is a catalog of different components within within the model. These are some diagrams that have come out of the model, but we have actually different types of visualizations here, so we can see what the financial and the ROI is for different different strategies, and we can see the catalogs here of what the status of different strategies currently is. And with this information, I can come in here if I have edit capability, and I can change that from fair to good. And you also might notice when I changed that the heat mapping of that changed immediately. Now, one thing with AbACUS is that when you change an item in any of these diagrams or artifacts, it is linked back to the model. So what we have a model which contains the different objects that we are trying to understand. So we have objects like applications and the strategies in this case and technology components. But if I change a component here, it is reflected in the model. So any other artifact that uses that would also be immediately updated. Now, with some of these visualizations, so they're the strategy ones, I could come into business strategies and we can see capability maps, and we can come into these and we can drill down onto to see what is underneath those. So we can have Sankey diagrams to show what is connected to that component, or we can have a look at some of the process diagram which is underneath that. So we're able to link through and drill down through diagrams as well. With the so we have different charts and pie charts, so a range of different visualizations that we can provide. If we get down into the application space, then this one's a bit more complex. So with this one, we have a tree map of all of the applications within the organization. So this is the example model that we're using is fairly complex. It contains quite a lot of applications, and it supports a number of different organizations regionally, which have separated. And we can come through and we can drill down on those. So we can see within Australia that we have these back-end processing and front-end processing. And you can see when I hover it that we're starting to see the total cost of ownership of that. So this is, we can tell the tree map to size the blocks depending on a different property. So in this case, it's the value of the total cost of ownership, but it might be some other value, or you might decide just to have them all the same shape. And what I can do then is that once I start to drill down through there, I can start to see the applications that are supporting that. And these are also heat mapped as well. So I can see, for example, that the ERP financials here is has a life cycle recommendation of retire, eliminate. The CMDB here is refresh, migrate, and you also see that the financial cost of that as well. And I can keep drilling down through here until I get to the moving away from the applications. Now I'm looking at the infrastructure that's supporting that. So I can see that there's a Windows platform which is supported by a number of servers, and I have some virtualization there which is running on this server. So finally, when I get down to this server, I can start to see more information about this server. So I can see what is linked into this server. So I can see that there's another server that connects to it. There's a Unix platform running on it, and I have 2 applications currently running on that. And I can also see what output connections there are on that as well. And I can also see the different properties. So we contain capture a lot of information for the applications. So some of these are the complexity. So this is part of one of our standard algorithms. So we use a complexity to count the number of incoming and outgoing connections, both of the components, but also indirectly for components that are connected to it. So that so we have some attribution of the complexity. We have the financial one as well. This is a standard one where if we set up the OPEX cost and the CAPEX costs and put the life cycle of the components, we can generate the total cost of ownership for a component over a number of years. And again, for that, we can see that for this server that there are costs here which are varying over year, and that might be because of different components being attached at different times, or it could be that the costs varying of the underlying components year on year, or it could be because of the length of time that the system has been available. So, for example, if the CAPEX is expired, then the costs will start to drop off at a period in time. But also you can see here these attributed costs. So this server is actually picking up costs from other areas. So that might be system software, for example. So if there's an operating system that is running on that, then it's picking up the cost of that as part of the overall server cost. So we have lots of different properties. We keep lifecycle information so that we can capture when things are going into production or when the end of life date is for different components. So again, we can use that to analyze and predict when we might need to do things with some of our components. So if we have servers that are reaching end of life in 2 years, then we need to highlight that, and so that we can tell our stakeholders that there might be underlying risks involved with that, so that we might need to start to replace some of these components. So we're able to actually drill down quite a bit on the information, and there are different types of visualizations that we can use. The other thing that we can do is, you might notice with the graphs here, so we have criticality rating and we have a list of all these applications. We can actually filter this information. So if I am looking at just the applications that we're looking to retire and eliminate, so if I click on that, what you will see that I now have a filter involved. And you see these charts and that have changed, because now it is filtered just on the things that are retiring. So the list of applications here are all of the ones that are applying, and we can see that we have some criticality 1 applications that are retiring. So I could continue on, and I could click on information criticality 1, and you can see that these charts here are actually changing dynamically to reflect that I've filtered this to have I'm looking at the retired applications of information criticality 1. So I can see what are they, and I could come through into these charts, for example, and I could start to drill down and see which applications they are. So I could see that there's a few applications within Switzerland and vice versa. So the idea is that we're able to allow users to not only just show the information on their dashboard, but allow them to actually go through and drill down into that information and link across to other areas to actually navigate through the dashboards to answer the questions that they have. And we can do a number of different dashboards, so we tailor them towards our users. So and it's very easy to do that. If I went down into this demo one here, for example, and if I had a look at, if I just wanted to add a new portlet here, normally this is done by the architects or the administrator. So I could set up a new visualization here, and I could set up a pie chart, and I just tell which architecture I'm interested in. So the production as is, I might look at an application, and I might want to do a pie chart on a let's see, maybe the criticality of applications, and I'll just aggregate those, and I'll have that now that, okay, everything in this one is, because I still have these filters in place, it was showing only one, but if I remove the criticality, I can just get a count of the number of applications by criticality. So it's very easy to, once you have the data set up and populated, and you have links into external systems to keep that up to date, then it's very easy for your stakeholders to come in and to view the information and to start to look at different look at the areas of their concern. We can also bring out information from different architectures. So, for example, we can pull out things at different dates. So we could see the costs of applications as of August 2017, as opposed to the full cost. So there's that's 1,900,000. Okay, so there's not a great deal of difference between those at the moment. So, but generally, we can see that the number of the retain invest has changed. So it looks like there's only one application that's actually there was a new application being added there. There's all right. So it looks like, yeah, just one new application is going to be added. So it's not a great deal of difference there. But so we can do things like, depending on what sort of information that you're interested in, we can show different diagrams. So these are the sort of data architecture type diagrams. So this is a diagram that has been created in the model, so in AbACUS, and we tell it that we want to show this, present this on the enterprise. So that way the users don't need to know sort of where don't need to go into AbACUS. We just render this information for them, and if you want to go and see these diagrams, then this is where you find it. You can provide the dashboard link to the user. You could embed it in an email and say, go have a look at this. This is your party subject area diagram. So it's all about sort of creating this information and making it available to a wider audience so that they consume the data that is provided by the architects. And my experience in architecture has been that a lot of architecture programs have failed because the architects do not communicate properly with their stakeholders, and they produce a lot of diagrams and things like that, but the users, the stakeholders who need that information, aren't getting the information that they require. So having this collaboration and the ability to send messages based on that means that the information is more useful. We're providing information to our stakeholders in a timely manner, and they can just come in and they can use the information that they need. So again, this is the technology view. So we can just come in and see what platform services. So this is the system software typically that supports the applications, and we can come in and again see the heap mapping of different components, and we're able to set up these visualizations to drill through our model so that we can understand how things are connected and how things work. So it's very easy to set that up. So users can change the data. If not all users can change data, so there's only a certain number who can do that. And you do not want to have all of your users being able to change data. But so for things like application managers, so you might have a certain manager this is responsible for a portfolio, so they are then able to update the data, so they can add new components there. So I could come in here and say add a new component, so it's saying add a new application there, and it's providing what are the main properties that I need to add to create that application. So it passes the data entry task to the people who are responsible for the applications, and it sort of it frees up a lot of the architects to do their architecture work. So is there any so with that, and we can start to collaborate, so different people, so even with this catalog here, you can have multiple users coming in simultaneously updating that catalog there. So it allows people to collaborate on data and to communicate the information throughout the organization. Is there any questions on that? There's a lot I can show you with AbACUS, but I don't want to spend too much time in one area.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I can understand what the actual tool is, and what we can see in the tools, how to use that. Yes, I can understand. I have a very simple question.
Yes.
For how to in terms of the operations, how to manage the changes at the same time. So there are many difficulties in the actual companies, how to keep the governance of the changes. So such kind of things I'm thinking. So that's another discussion maybe, but that's my point.
Yeah. Okay. I'll cover parts of that. So what I've got at the moment is I've now loaded the AbACUS Studio. So this is where the architects do their work. So there's a number of things with governance. There's generally two levels of looking at the governance. One is on the data side, where we can sort of control the data that is coming in, and we can use permissions to as to what people can do and what they can't do. But there's the enterprise architecture practice, which requires some governance and control as to how people use the tool or use the process. So what we recommend, or I recommend to a lot of customers, is that in order to implement an architecture practice, and I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit here, but you need a number of things. Actually, I might even show you whether I've got a separate slide for this, because I do get asked this, and this is probably a hobby horse of mine. So okay, right. So what I say to people, you can see this, in order to, because my experience before joining AbACUS or Avolution about 5.5 years ago was I was working with a consultancy where we're implementing architecture practices, and I was working quite heavily with TOGAF, and I was doing a lot of training with TOGAF. But what we find is that and I've had the ability to actually speak to hundreds of architects across hundreds of organizations, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work. What we find is that in order to implement the architecture practice, you need a number of things. You need to have some people who have the domain knowledge and know the methodologies and the tools to be able to do their work. You need to have some sort of method of how you do things, your approach to doing things, supported by reference architectures and standards and guidelines. But you need a tool and a repository to allow you to do the modeling, to do the analysis, and to create the different viewpoints, and to publish that to make that available to your stakeholders. But underneath that, you need the governance, right? So you need governance to cover the life cycle of components. You need governance to cover the whole process of how people are, whether you have the right people, whether they're following the processes of that, and to be able to measure the effectiveness of the whole program. Now, the tool and repository, AbACUS will provide this area here, the tool and repository, and will support the governance and will support sort of the method, but you need to add your own governance, you need to add your own people and your own method to combine it to get an effective practice. So where we will try and support the governance aspect, we can't do everything. So if you set up in AbACUS and said, this is how we're going to do the modeling, this is how we're going to add the data, but if someone decides that they're not going to use it, or they're just going to start a project themselves and just do it themselves, then having AbACUS by itself is not going to prevent that. So you need a combination of everything. So so some of the things that we can do is we can use permissions to help protect the architectures. So one of the things that we do is that within the tool we have support multiple architectures, because you'll have different states of the architecture. You'll have your production architecture. You might have an ideation architecture where you're playing around with new ideas. So you might want to go in there and say, well, what would happen if I ripped out all of my servers and moved everything up into the cloud? So obviously you don't want to go into your production server and rip out all your production architecture and delete all of your servers. So you create a copy of it so you can play around with it and see what it would look like and measure the difference in performance. You might also have transitional architectures or target state architectures defining where we might be heading towards, in a future time. So with these, we can actually have different permissions on those. So typically what we would have, we have a production architecture, which is purely what is in production. So for many of our customers, for example, work in financial services and banks, so they get audited all the time by outside regulators. So when they come in, they just want to see what's in production. The regulators are not interested in what they're currently developing. So we keep a separate architecture for them, and that architecture is protected so that only certain people can move things into production. And you would line that then to your iTools sort of release management processes, so that the architecture is kept up to date with the production and your release management. So we can do that, and we can also have permissions on any of the components. So so some people can add, so they create, read, update, delete permissions on any of the components. So you might say that only people from the architecture team or the application team can add applications. Other people can read them, but they can't create them. So that way you can put permissions on that. You might put permissions on things to say that this information is going to be, like, say your servers, the servers might come from your CMDB. So if you want to add a new server, you do not do it in AbACUS, so we'll stop you from doing that. You go to your CMDB, add it there, and that will interface with AbACUS and will be created in AbACUS that way. So that way we control the authoring. And we can also get down to the property level so that if you want to hide IP addresses on components, so for your servers, if you want to hide costs, then you can just remove read authority for people so that only certain people can see that information. So we do that by setting up groups of users so that they can restrict what they can see. So okay, so with the with the architectures, we set up a. Did you have a question or no?
No. Yeah, I'm understanding the point. So thank you. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So what I'll show you now is because I've mentioned that when we create a new architecture, we can create it from existing library. So that's where we have the lots of different frameworks, and it's very easy to actually add a new framework because of the way that AbACUS has been designed, and we can merge our components together. So the architecture that, or meta model that most of our customers use is this meta model, which right. So this is a hybrid meta model, and what it is, you can see at the bottom level, it has the information, infrastructure, applications, and the business areas. Very much like TOGAF, but it's a little bit richer in some areas. So we add them to what is commonly required by different users, and we've also added some services. So we have services at the infrastructure. So we can do infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or business services. We then bring in at the process level, we bring in BPMN. So only the high level BPMN, because some customers like to go down to level 1 or level 2 sort of business processes. Others say, well, I just want to see the high level process. I don't care about my level 5 processes as far as my enterprise architecture is concerned. So we might decide, well, we'll just get rid of these start events and end events for you. But moving up, we have capabilities, although TOGAF now has moved to support capabilities better than it has previously. But we also add in the project area. So the process area, we can bring in the classification framework of PCF. So from APQC, we brought in the BPMN from the OMG. We've brought in services from different areas. We've brought in these project sort of concepts here. So projects, waivers and risks from Prince. And we've brought in the strategy area, which again is moving into Archimate and TOGAF, but this is from the business motivation model, which is pretty standard. So we can use this, and they're all connected via English-like connections. So a capability uses an application, and an application is hosted on a server. So it's very easy to understand how things are connected, rather than, if you're using Archimate, some of the terms and connections there are a little bit overloaded for my liking, and it's difficult to understand what is meant by them. So with this meta model, as I said, a lot of our customers use it, but when we implement it, we always work with the customer and say, well, what other types of components and connections do you have? What sort of so it gets back to what sort of questions are you trying to answer with your model, and then we'll make sure that we have the components and connections add that. So, you know, there's a number of different ones that we often add. Like we have, you know, integrations, for example. A lot of customers interested in that. There might be security components that other customers are interested in. So we don't say that this is the meta model, you must comply with this meta model. We say this is a reference meta model. It's a very good meta model, but you will need to tailor it to your organization, and it's very easy to do that. So once we do that, we start loading the components into the model. So normally we can see all of the components via catalogs. So if I bring up a application catalog, so this is a list of all of the applications which are in this current architecture, and I can come through and I can filter these. I can change this data, so I can change the supplier, and I can change that to so there's 1, 2, 3 limited. So that is just a field there, but I can come through and I could filter on any of those. So similar to Excel. So okay, just cancel that. So we can come through and we can filter and do the normal things, change the order of columns and that we normally for you know, that you would do in Excel. So and we have different catalogs. So each of them are heap mapped. So they're all dynamically heap mapped. So if I change this from retain invest, so we have drop down lists. So to ensure consistency of the data. So everything is I can change that information there. I can also change things that it is linked to. So we have the concept of a standard that it is linked to. We can also show what platform services that it is currently attached to. And in this case, it's not only showing what it's attached to, but it's showing information about that. So it's saying that this application is, so say this IVR application here, it is currently attached to a Apache Tomcat server, which has a lifecycle recommendation of retain, but it uses an access database which is due for retire eliminate, and it's got some lifecycle dates as when that should occur. So we're able to go through and visualize the data, change data, and add data here very quickly, and we can go through and we can change the information quite easily as well. I could go to this application and I can see where that application is also used. So I could go to my properties here and, oh, I didn't mean to, oh, sorry, I just, all right. So I can sort of view the references to this. So I can see that this CRM is actually what the outgoing components are, what the incoming, but where it is used. So it's used in a couple of catalogs. It's used in some matrices, but it's also used on a diagram. So I could just quickly go to that and see that the CRM application is there. Now, if I go to this application and I just change that to CRM X as an example, then if I go back to the application catalog there, you can see that the name is automatically updated there. So whenever I change any data, it updates immediately. So everything's kept synchronized. So so we use this to heap map, so we can do filters, we can do sort, we can change what properties are being displayed, so that some users we might just want to show financial information. So we might want to have others just showing the interfaces. Now the one thing with the AbACUS is that because it uses a graph database, is the connections between components can have properties. So particularly in interfaces, we might say, well, this AbACUS, for example, interfaces with the ERP financial database, and it does have via an ODBC connection. And we might have some other information about the life cycle of that, and also a view of the interface. So we can keep track of the interfaces as well. So if we go down to, so there's a whole range of different catalogs that you can create. So all you do is you just select what sort of component that you're interested in and start mapping the what sort of properties that you want to see within a catalog. We can get down to matrices, which show the in its simplest form, just shows the connections between different components. So this is showing departments located at a particular location. So if I wanted to remove the AU human resources to Tokyo, I just click on that link. So that's changed that connection, and I just click on that. And to remove it, what it's doing is it's telling me that if I remove that link, that link is used elsewhere. Do I want to do that? I'll say yes. So I just dynamically change the structure of that connection. And I can always do Control Z to undo things as well. So it's in case you do things by mistake. The other things that you can do is more advanced matrices and indirect matrices. So if I went back to our meta model, so with the projects are connected to via an impacted connection to processes, to departments, to applications, to different infrastructures. So when when you implement a project that is going to deliver new capability or remove an application, then that project is linked to each of those components. So we know what it is going to what it's going to touch. So by having a look at the project interdependencies, what we're able to do is to say, for a particular project, show me all of the things that it is connecting to, but then also for each of these, show me what other projects might also be implementing, interfacing with that same component. That way, what you're able to do is, so the single customer view project here is impacting this department, customer services, these servers, these applications, this capability and a location. But we can also see that these other projects here, the ERP tech refresh, impacting the Sydney location, but the cybersecurity project is impacting on a lot of the same components. So what that means is that if there's a delay in this project, then that will probably cause a delay in the cybersecurity project. So there's an interdependency between those projects that we weren't aware of. So we can either collaborate or we can certainly manage the interdependencies between that. So we can do things like looking at for applications and projects, what are they actually doing with different applications? So we can see here that the ERP HRM, the tech refresh is doing a refresh migrate, and the cybersecurity is doing a redesign. So you'd look at that and say, well, why are these guys redesigning it if these guys are doing something else with it? So we can also do things like going from departments through to processes via the applications to say, for these departments, what processes are they supporting and what applications are they actually using to do that? So we can see here that this department here in Canada has a process dispose of assets, which is using two applications, and one of them is due for retirement. So we're able to understand the information there. The other one that we probably use a bit more often is the diagrams. So we might do things like the capability maps, and we can, as I've seen before, we can drill through into the components underneath that, and we can make changes to those if we need. We can also do things like look at costs. So again, I mentioned before that we're able to look at costs and how they are attributed through the organization. So for example, here we can see that there are two network components which are used by this server. So the cost of these components is being attributed to this server, which flows through to these platform services to an application, which flows up to the department, or it could flow up to a project. So what we're able to do with that is not so much for cost accounting, but it's to understand what the impact of change is going to be for your project. So if I created a new project to say, well, I'm going to rip these components out and replace it with a service, then what would be the impact to the business unit of that change? So if I, so for example, if I said, for example, this IVR application was going to use a new service. So maybe it was a platform as a service, and what I would do in another architecture would be to create this, put a cost for this, and then delete all of this stuff because it's going to be provided by the service provider, and that's where we can go through and do comparisons between different architectures. We can, so we're able to use the costs. We can also use algorithms to look at the availability of different components if they are hosted on site. So these are based on our inbuilt analysis tools. So there's the financial, complexity, performance, and reliability. But we also have scripts that we can use to actually use algorithms to analyze a lot of our architecture. So for example, we have some example ones where we can look at the business fits and do application recommendations or financial totals, and these scripts can be created quite easily without any code. And I can show you a visual composer here at the moment. So if I show you the algorithm blocks, so what I can do with this is that I can start with an algorithm and say, for this, get a component. So from my production as is architecture, pull out the applications. From that, get the property of that application. So I might be interested in the okay, I'll just do that. So I'll just get the property, right? So I'll get the applications and I'll get a financial, and I'll say get the OPEX of that, your operational cost, and I might say then I want to attribute that cost and the sum of all of the applications to any parent, maybe projects that are using that. So I'd go down to find a project, and I would tell it to store a property on the project of maybe a financial, and I'd have a maybe an OPEX cost there. So what this script would do if I ran that would be to go through all of the applications, and for the applications to get the sum of all of the applications for a particular project, and attribute all of those costs up to the project. So that allows us, a very simple algorithm to move costs around the model. And we have lots of different algorithms. So we can use that to do risk analysis, to do any type of property. So we can do application, business fit, scores. So if you want to try and assess your application portfolio as to what you should do with it, you can use scripts to help you do that. So, you know, we can look at the FTE costs or project server ages. So we could see a script here to look at what are the all right, what are the ages of different components. So you might want to have a script to tell you or identify any servers that have their end of life date within the next 12 months, so that then it will highlight those or even heat map those, so then that you can be aware of those, so you can start to plan for those changes. So again, these are types of visualizations that you can do. We can automatically create different landscape diagrams to show how the how different components are used. So if we have a look at the Japan department here, so these are all of the applications that they're using. We can also do things to create solutions diagrams from the application viewpoint. So we might go down to look at the CRM application, and we can see that the CRM application, which I did rename CRMX before, so that's an example of how that filters through. So it's showing underneath that the platform services that it is supporting, the infrastructure underneath that, the capabilities above that it is supporting, and the actual business units that are using those capabilities. So we're able to go through and do that analysis, you know, on the model. So so once we have this data, we can do different charts. We can assess the costs of the different components. So we can analyze the very easily. So one thing that I often get asked is about the diagramming, or also looking at the impact analysis. So if I wanted to have a look at this CRMX application, I could just come down to here and just tell it to create a drill down diagram, and it will show me everything that's attached to that CRM. So from 1 degree of separation. In our next release, which is due out imminently in the enterprise, we actually have a nicer way of actually exploring that, so that it has a nice visualization, so you can drill through the through this list to see how things are connected. So if I wanted to make a change to this application, the first thing I would do would be to do that, to see what is it it's currently connected to. So I can see that customer services use that, so customer service owns it. These are platform services that it uses. It uses these databases and supports these processes. And again, I could also continue on and keep drilling down through those and say, well, what for that process, what else, what is that using? And that will show me information related to that as well. So I might close a few documents here because I've got lots of things open. I'll just discard those changes. Okay, so in terms of the drawing then, so if I come into a diagram, I get to pick the architecture, so I can come in and I can do a new diagram. So it supports different viewpoints, so that you can control how information is being rendered in a diagram. So you pick the view, and right, so I'll pick a new solution diagram. Are you still with me at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, no, it just went very quiet, so the background noise disappeared. So okay.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Look, if you have any questions along the way, please, please stop and ask me. So if I'm interested in new components, so I could bring in a process, for example. So I'll just create a new process here. And once within the the model, when we set up the meta model, we define how different components are connected to each other. So if I click on this new process and I click on this arrow here, then it's telling me that it can actually be connected to a data entity via an accesses, or via to a database via a users, or to a department that performs a role. So I can create a new department maybe that performs the role, or and I can continue on diagramming in that matter and say, well, that has a sequence flow to a new process, or I can tell it that this process interfaces with an existing component, which might be an existing process where through a sequence flow, and I can come through here and I can just select which process that it actually is connected to. So that's using the live components. So I can either drag them out that way, or I can drag them out from the model itself. So if I came into into my applications, for example, I could pull out the AbACUS application here, and I could say, well, this application supports that. All right, so it's not. Okay, so I'll do that. So I'll connect that to a department, and it will. So there's incoming and outgoing connection. So it's saying attaching to the department that is going to be owned by that department. So I can create the connections in the visual on the diagrams themselves, so that we can create a whole range of different diagrams, and I can just tailor that as I go. Now with the diagrams, I can change the appearance of this, so I can display different information on the diagrams through annotations. So I'll show you an example of that. So if we come down into the diagrams here, I'll show you for the Australia. So we might see so applications to infrastructure diagram. So within this diagram here, I can see that for the website that I'm able to annotate it, and that is add additional information onto the component. And what this allows you to do is to load up information onto the diagram without having to add different components or making it visually sort of quite complex. So what I'm able to do is to show things like the attached connections. So for this application, what the platform services are that it uses. I can use that via a color marker, so I can show the approval of the information, or I can show the criticality of the information, or I can show some properties of the different languages that it is using. And again, I can just come in here and I can change this information, and I can sort of delete some of the connections. So I just removed the C++ and made that now just a Java application. So again, making that change within the tool here has actually changed that connection within the model. So again, did you have a question? Oh.
No, not at this moment.
Okay.
I understand that.
All right. So another thing is with the connections. So these are the interfaces between the applications. So I could add a new interface here. So to ERP1. So I'll attach that via an interfaces, and I'll just I think it's overlaid that one at the moment. So I'll just take that out. So there's a new one there, and I can just define, well, what is the standards that I'm using for that. So I might say that it's using HTTP interface. So you can see that I just added that. So what this application has multiple connections to this application, but they are different properties on there. One is using different protocols, might contain different data payloads. So this is the kind of information that we often have on that. And we can, again, we can heat map these components. We can heat map the connections. So I could go to the connections, and I can say the interfaces, and I can change the color depending on a property. So I can say for a specific value, Okay, so it's only one value at the moment, so I can change that depending on different different properties. So if it was different life cycles of that, so I'm not quite sure what data is there at the moment. Okay, there is some data there, so I'll just give it a range from green to red, and okay. So now I've just quickly heat mapped the connections depending on the life cycle of that connection is what's happening to it. So again, you're able to use the heat mapping very easily. So I could set that up on any property so to understand sort of what might need changing. So the other things that we can do, of course, is that we can contain sort of different sorts of different charts, so we can see application sort of life cycles type of information for different projects to see when they're running. In our next release, we will have better Gantt charts in the enterprise, so there'll be nicer looking Gantt charts which you will be able to drill down on as well. But this is giving you an indication at the moment of when different projects are going to run. You might have different things for charts for technology standards of this is a very basic one of showing the support end dates of different different components, so you can see then when you might need to go about changing them. And as I mentioned before, once you have the information relating to the properties, you can use the algorithms to actually highlight and even sort of send messages that something has changed that now needs attention. So we're trying to automate as much of the architectural work as we need. Now, so how are we going in terms of questions? Is there any particular areas that you would like me to focus on? Because I've been covering a lot of area quite quickly.
Yes. So the purpose of the meeting is to understand the overall picture, the overall coverage, and how to make it. So yeah, at this moment, I'm very happy to all of your explanations. And my plan is to make this chart in MeTag, and we are doing the aircraft businesses, and we need to keep the airworthiness and aircraft safety to maintain the what the business capability is, and what the application and what the technologies, and we are keeping the all of the things in one place, and we are also providing the customers easier. Yeah, we are doing this way as like a visualization.
Yes.
So such kind of things we need to do that. So yeah. So I try to understand the whole pictures of the AbACUS. So yeah.
Yeah. So what we would look at then is from an architectural viewpoint is in term and aligning with TOGAF would be who your stakeholders are and what do they need to know. So for example, a lot of our financial customers are very interested in things like the platform services, so the operating systems and what versions that they are running. If there is a fault or something that comes up with a component, what is the impact of that, and also to be aware of it. So in some cases, what we do is that we show I've done algorithms for some customers to actually take the do a health check on the actual platform services that they're running. So they might have a capability which relies on different applications, and the applications require different platform services. So in some cases, they might have, tens of application services. So if they're using an operating system, for example, that a vulnerability is is announced on that, or if that platform service is reaching end of life, then they need to know on the capability what the impact of that will be. So what I can do is that I can use algorithms to roll up, in that case, the worst case and the average of the components underneath it to give an overall technology health for a capability. So in some cases, I could show them that that they had a capability which is critical to their business, which was running on technology which was really past its use-by date and represented a real risk to the organization. So that's where you're able to use the information to understand what you have and to move that through. So for the aircraft business, you might be, in terms of safety, you might be interested in what technology components are being used and what is the current view of those technology components. So if there's an operating system, or if there's a protocol or something that has reached end of life, but it is supporting a capability in the aircraft business, how do you identify that, and how do you communicate that to your stakeholders? And we can do that through algorithms and by using some of the visualizations that we've seen before. So, for example, if we went back here and showed, if we went into capabilities, for example, we could come in and we could show what's the, so if I went into, say, business, we might have something here to drill down on the capabilities and heat map them according to the what's underneath them. So these ones here, I'm going down for these capabilities now under the applications that I'll just increase the size for that. Actually, I'll go back and I'll show you what I mean. So what you might have in your organization is that you might have your aircraft capabilities, and you could allow users to actually drill down on the particular capabilities to see what is underneath that. So these are the applications here, and what is the actual health of those. So if anything that is red means that you know, there's probably you know, or the meaning might change, but you know, that could be a data risk or it could be a technology risk that is part of that component. Now, what I did for one was that customer was to take the worst case to show what is the weakest link of any component within your capability. So if you have one application which is really has a risk, then the weakest link means that whole capability has a risk. So so they're very interested to know that, so they can see what the overall health of the components are. So you might be able to set something up for that quite easily, using the capturing the information, using algorithms to move information, or use averaging or summing or moving, attributing information to other components to understand the impact. So so we can set that up as well. The other thing that we can do is when you're understanding change, what you can do is that you can take an architecture and you can create a copy of the architecture. So with this ideation template, well, actually what I'll do is I will get this production as is and I'll evolve it, and it'll create a copy for me. And what I'll do is that I'll call this my sort of what if type architecture. And what I could do then is that I could go into this architecture and I could go down, say, to a diagram, and I might go down to my applications to infrastructure, and I might start deleting components. So what I might do is that I might replace this with a service. So I've got a new platform service there now. Which would have its own cost. And what I might do then is to say, well, I no longer need this, so I can delete that from the architecture. and I could rewire this application to actually use that service as well. And I might sort of use this one to use it as well. And I could then delete these components. And it's telling me that it's used in all these different places, but this is in a separate architecture. So what if I had properties of cost on those components, I could actually then do a comparison. So if I ran something like the analysis, and it hasn't been set up quite properly, but what it should do is actually, if I gave the platform service a cost, I could do a comparison of what's the difference between the costs between this architecture and another architecture. So I could then chart the difference with that, or what I could do is that I could compare an architecture with another architecture. So I could come into my what if, and I could have a look at my catalogs and have a look at my let's see, so I'll come into my infrastructure and have a look at my servers. And what I can do then is that I can compare this and say, compare this with my production as is. And what it's telling me is that you've actually deleted these two servers from this. So we're able to keep track of that. And if we had costs to that, we can see what all the changes would be. So what you're able to do then is to create a target state of what things would look like. If you use the algorithms underneath that to measure your costs, to measure your risk, to measure your reliability, or any other KPIs that you use, you could actually demonstrate what the difference between different architectures would be. And you're able to come in and you could do a chart, for example, where I could do I'll try a capability space, and I could pick a production as is, and I could pick different architectures here, which might represent different solutions. And what I would do is pick the KPIs that I'm interested in. And what it would do is that it's showing that this architecture here is very high on complexity. This option here is, this one here has a different mix of the KPIs. So what you're able to do is to represent to your stakeholders that there are different trade-offs between different architecture solutions. So it's not always about cost. There's risk, there's time to deliver, and there's a whole range of different KPIs that you'll use. But you're using the algorithms underneath that to understand how the architecture will operate and how it will perform. And then what you can do is with these architectures, you can create transitional architectures. So these ones that I've used here, Horizon 1, 2, 3, are actually actual transitional views, but that context just to show the differences between architectures and how you can represent them. But again, what you could do there is you can go into create a chart there, and I could show a new chart, say a line chart, and I could show the architectural properties between. So this might represent how we're going to transition to a target state. So if I did that and I just picked those same KPIs again, then what this is showing for the different KPIs is that over the life of the transition, so from production, so this is where we currently are. This is where we want to be in terms of our target. So we want the impact is going to improve over time, but it's not a straight line improvement. So things like the complexity might actually get worse before it gets better. So if we're going to reduce complexity by reducing some applications with new applications. At probably at Horizon 1 and Horizon 2, we might have the old applications plus the new applications, so our things might actually be getting worse before they get better. So again, it allows you to understand how you're going to transition from your current state to your target state, what is going to happen so that you can keep stakeholders informed as to what to expect with the overall evolution of your architectures. And with the architectures, we can always do comparisons between the architectures. So one of the things is that we can keep the architectures synchronized. So we can, if I click on this architecture and tell it to sync with a, I'll just come out of this architecture, I'll just come onto that. So I'll go to my production as is, and I might say to sync that against the 2008 actual. So this might be to see what has changed between the architectures. So what I can do is that I can create a report to tell me what are all the differences between the architectures. So I can generate a report. So between all of these architectures, these are all of the components and the properties that have changed between different architectures. So in this instance, there's quite a complex lot of changes. But if you explored sort of the ideation one that we did before, where we changed some servers, but we implemented new platform service, but in practice, we probably also change a lot of properties. We'd also change some of the applications. We probably change some of the support processes. So it is quite a complex change. If you did the comparison, it will tell you what are the differences, what has changed between these two architectures. And I can choose to, for these changes to actually sync them so that to bring the change in from one architecture to the other, or I can export this and say, well, these changes are all of the gaps in TOGAF terms that I'm going to need to address to meet for a project to deliver. So then a project would be formed up, and the project would then start to address all of those different components. So we would go back to our model, and we would start to create a new, let's see, we'd create a new project. And what we would do is, I'll just show you in the meta model. So what we would do, we would create a new project here, and we would say, okay, this project is going to impact these applications because they're no longer connecting to these servers. It would impact these servers, it would impact these platform services, probably maybe also some other services as well that would be changed. So then that project looking at eventually deleting the servers that we mentioned, and then implementing the new platform service and setting that up and changing the support processes and everything else that would need to be done with that. So that way we could then see from the analyzing and querying our model what the impact of the changes would be. Now, the other thing that I'll just show you very quickly, and then we'll go into some general discussion, would be querying the model. So we have this meta model of all of these components connected to each other. So what we can do is, if I went into a diagram, and okay, so I'll just do a new diagram, and I'll come down and we'll do our production as is. And I want this production as is, new diagram. And I need to get a
architecture.
That's the diagram. That's right, so that should be fun. So now what I can do here is that I can come in here and use this element selection to actually query the model. So if I want to come in here, these are all of the types of components that we have, and these are all of the connections. So I might want to find something. I've got a server which is AUH. So I'll just put in that. So I've got AUH03. So this is a server. Okay. So if I go back into my element selection, I might say, well, show me what's attached to that. So I've got that server selected. Now I can come in and say, well, there is hosted at connection. So if I click on that, then I'll see that there's an application hosted on that server. So from that application, I might say, well, who owns that application? So there's a department that owns it. And I might say, well, who uses that application? So I'll want to see what processes are performed on it. So I can use this to query. So I can use, so if I did that, I can see that at the moment that it's using these applications owned by these departments and supporting these processes. So I can use this query to navigate through the architecture. I could come through and say, show me everything that's using HTTP as a standard. So I can see that there's lots of servers here that. All right, so I probably should clear that because I've actually got some things already collected. So I'll just go back on that. So if I came in here and said I wanted to see a particular standard, so if I put in HTTP, so I've got nothing there. Okay, so maybe if I use IBM, so if I come in IBM, I can see there's a whole range of databases there. There's a whole range of servers here, which have a standard of IBM. Now, it could be more specific and see exactly what standard that is. I could show things that have a particular property type. So whether it's a financial, whether it's a particular name, or whether it's particular value. So I might be looking for a particular owner. So maybe if there's no good, I don't own anything. So I might look for a particular properties or particular values that I can use to filter. And once I do that, I can use that to filter through the whole architecture. And I can do that on the connections as well. So I could come through my connections and look for different properties or different standards there. So I might have more success with the HTTP here. Okay, so here we have the interfaces. So there's only two interfaces that use HTTP in this model, but I can select those, and I could then say, well, show me then what are attached to them. So which applications are they? And okay, so I can see that these are the applications that use the the website and the IVR are the only ones that use the HTTP protocol. So this is very powerful querying that you can use to actually analyze and navigate through your architecture. And what we're doing is that what I did was that I started with the server and I went through to the applications. I then went across through this owns connection to the department, but also went up through the user's connection to the process. So I've branched my query at that point, and I could continue on and say, well, for that process, what capabilities it's supporting and which goals and objectives of the organization. As long as there's connections and components, I can query through the whole model, and it's a very powerful way of doing impact analysis, but understanding how things work in your organization. So look, there's a lot of things that I haven't shown you because it's a very rich tool, but maybe as we're getting to the end, I'll leave it if you have any questions or if there's anything that John wants to add.
John's another meeting, so after this one, I was
okay.
I was saying AROP study case, use case, and I will send you the link to this recording as well. Do you need extra license for your team to set up and try AbACUS?
Oh yes, we would like to try another period, 2 or 3 months, to analyze to try to input our current situations like application portfolios and what the link to the our business processes, data, what is a data flow diagram is. So I would like to try to do that in your tool. So I would like to have a extra license for the 1 or 2 months.
Okay.
Is that possible?
Yes. So we'll extend the current few license I think we have right now for 45 days. So in this license, everything is included, including Google Sheet, ServiceNow Index, Technopedia. So all the, you will have a link for enterprise side as well.
Okay, thank you.
So how do you
to do so? Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Eric. So where do you have that information at the moment? Is that in Excel, or do you have where is that imported from?
Excel.
Excel. Excel's very easy. Excel's very easy to import. So
so not only Excel, but also we try to implement the ServiceNow. To manage the ITBM, ITSM, IT service management and business management. So we try to try the connection between the AbACUS and the ServiceNow.
Yeah. Okay. So what I would recommend is using the Excel is a really easy way of getting data in, particularly when you're evaluating. So what you could do is if you set up a catalog, and we can help with that, you can see this is a catalog that we have, but we're able to export this to Excel. So if I clicked on that and and I save that, and what I can do is that I can open the Excel file, which will look pretty much identical to what we have. What I can do then is that I can actually add, so I set up the properties that I want, but I can just copy and paste information, and I could copy that. And so if I created that as, okay, so I'll just call it Peter 1 and Peter 2. I don't get very imaginative at the end of the week. So if I, so if I just close that, and if I went back into this and then did an import, so I can import that. I think that was happening. So I hope it was okay. I think it was that one. So what that will do, so what that's done is that it's imported that, and it's told me that it created those components. So if I just for Peter, then you can see those two applications were imported into the model. Now what I can also do is that because I copied that, I actually connected that to the process and the department, so we can instantiate those links as well, as long as the component that you're linking to is already available in the model. And that's a very easy way and very quick way of connecting things up. And once you do that, you can start to query the model, and you can start doing different things to analyze your architecture.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much. So yeah, it's time to leave now. So
okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your explanation, and I'm really understand the clear understanding of what the AbACUS capability is and what your recommendation is. So I will try to use this tool for our environment, and we may have some bunch of questions. So I will email to you, and I promise to provide you the feedback of our trial. So yeah, thank you very much for today.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, nice to talk to you. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Okay,
Okay.
bye-bye.